the general public laugh and dig my stuff. It's people within the entertainment industry that seem to take umbrage to my jokes and what I do. So they take offense simply because they're ignorant and they don't understand, instead of asking questions and learning. So I sat down one day, and again, it's almost therapeutic. I just put it all on the page, and the best part is absolutely none of them will see it because they don't like me. So it'll just be my own joke to myself.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. And this week, I am once again joined, as I am every January, by Gough of Beernuts Productions. This is my friend from Australia, who all of the long-term listeners will recognise him by now. I think this is like the 8th or 9th appearance of Gough. We've stuck it now to just once a year, because when we first met, I think you were coming on like 2 or 3 times a year, and we're like, no, let's rein it back a bit, because I want to give other guests a chance. I have about 50 recordings a year. One for one person is generally a pretty safe bet. Gough can't, as much as Gough would love to be on the hit all the time and constantly, we can't have this. This isn't Gough's Genuine Chit Chat, as much as I would love that. But Gough, it's a lovely pleasure to have you on in our yearly tradition. This is the podcast tradition, having you as the first guest on of 2025, as I have had you on the last couple of years. So how are you doing, good sir? How did 2024 treat you and Beernuts Productions?
Well, yes, I'm very well. So thank you for that. And I am your January friend. The other 11 months of the year, you know, we're sort of mortal enemies. But January, we're best buds. But no, it's all good. And yeah, 2024 was a very good year. We Beernuts Productions, we released 3 films, one audio sort of comedy sketch situation, and also we had the podcast, a few more episodes of the podcast dropped. So it was a very busy year indeed for Beernuts Productions, with the beernutsproductions.com early plug in case people get bored and tune out early. So, you know, I thought I'd just, shoehorn that in.
That's amazing. Well, with the podcast, one thing I like to always ask you is, because you and I are both busy guys, and we don't have time to listen to every episode of each other's. So I like to get a couple of suggested guests from you of what, like, some highlighted episodes. No shade on any of the other people you don't speak about, but for any sort of highlights of maybe the last year or even 2 years of Beernuts Productions, the podcast, are there any guests that really stand out that I can pop in the notes and then check out?
Well, one thing I did do was, I know this might sound a wee bit lame, but a lot of people ask, because obviously the way I do things when it comes to filmmaking and, well, pretty much everything is very different. I'm not your standard usual dude who produces your usual content. So a lot of people ask me, and also obviously because of my disability as well, a lot of people ask me questions, like, why do you do this and how do you do that, and so forth and so on. So one thing I did do last year was I put a post up on social media, and I said, if you have any questions, write them in the comment section below, and I'll do a podcast where I answer all your questions. So I filmed that one as well. So, because usually mine is just an audio podcast, but I thought I would film this one. So I had Craig Ingham, one of the Beernuts Productions actors interviewer, and me as the interviewee, so to speak. And and it's a bit longer, that episode as well. So I had people put questions forward. And then, Craig and we did like an interview. And so you could check that one out on YouTube. It's obviously on the Beernuts Productions YouTube channel, as well as through the podcast apps and whatnot, your Spotify's and Apple and all those podcast providers. So so that was an interesting one. So if people want to learn more about myself after listening to our chat, that will be obviously full of hilarity and fun, then they can obviously give that a watch. But as far as guests that I interviewed, let me think. Who I've had some really cool ones in regards to. I interview people who are well known and some people who aren't so well known. So this is actually quite a funny one, actually, because I interviewed the guy who is the leader of the Australian Marijuana Party, because marijuana isn't legal here in Australia. It is for medicinal purposes, but not for recreational purposes. Mm-hmm. So I interviewed him. Now, he lives only about 3 hours away from the studio, but he said, can we do it via phone? I said, that'll be fine. So we call him up, and he's a super nice guy. And he says, before we start recording, he says, do you mind if I just smoke a joint while we're doing the interview? I said, buddy, you do what you want, man. I'm not in charge of you. You do you, you know? So he said, okay, great. So he's having a puff and we're having a chat and all's going well. And then I asked him a question. And then halfway through his answer, he says, I forgot what the question was, but here are some more fun facts. And he gave me some more facts. So that was... So that was quite a good interview. I enjoyed that one. But yeah, no, I have a range of guests. So like whether it be sport, politics, music, whenever I have a musician on the podcast, I always make sure they bring in their guitar or whatever their instrument of choice might be, and I get them to do because like an original or if they're a couple of their original tracks so people can get to know what they are, because I have a proper studio set up that I record out of, so it sounds really good for them. So if you see a musician there, you'll hear a couple of their original songs, and just interesting folks that I have met along the way as well. So yeah, there's all kinds of people. So if you scroll through, you might recognize one or two of the names, but if you read the little blurb that goes with each podcast, you'll get a bit of an idea of who everybody is, and then you can decide on who you want to listen to. So far we've busted out 92 episodes. So that's pretty good going, because most podcasts usually fold after about 6. So I'm thinking I'm doing okay.
You definitely are, and I listen when I can in occasional points. I must hold my hands up and say I haven't listened to the Gough Q&A one. That would have been a wise thing to do before this conversation. But I did listen to from our last recording, I think, or the one before that. I remember I listened to the one with Tanya De Jong, who is really interesting. Yes. The Mind Medicine Australia. I also I listened to the one with Al Gibson as well, because I think he's just he was quite an interesting chap as well, and I think he's also one of the actors in Beernuts, and I quite like listening to your conversations with people who've been in Beernuts, because also it's very fun to have the camaraderie that they have with you. So there's plenty of ones that like I recommend as well, and so I'll put some of the details in the description of kind of if people are really confused and really don't know where to start, because I know like the Fiona Patton one was really good as well, which obviously that one is a little bit older, but people could also check out the one with me, because I'm on the Beernuts podcast. I'm part of the 92 or the 91, because Gough in himself doesn't count. But you don't count your own guest. But that's amazing. It's always fun hearing what's going on with your podcast and stuff like that. So I'm very excited to see what's got in store for 2025. But before we delve into the two movies that you very kindly sent me, I want to ask a little bit about the audio release that you put out. This was the one where, if I remember the trailer correctly, you recorded it with, there's 5 or 6 of you, and you were all kind of recording at the same time. I want you to tell us a little bit about that, because a lot of audio productions, people get recorded separately and then kind of lay over, and I know obviously with recording, you don't have every single actor all there at the same time. So with that audio production, like, how was that being there with like 5 or 6 people sort of recording all in succession with each other?
Yeah, well, that was done absolutely on purpose for the simple reason, so it's called the body corporate meeting. Mm-hmm. So usually you are correct. We go into the voiceover booth and would record down our things one actor at a time, and I would go in with them and direct them as we go and all that sort of stuff. And then they would leave and the next one would come in and we would edit it all together and it would all be good. But with this one, I did it differently for a couple of reasons. The main reason is because it's a meeting. So that person speaks, followed by that person, then they speak again, and he speaks and she speaks. So everybody just has sort of one sentence at a time. And because everybody's sort of either answering him or answering her or being sarcastic to that bloke or whatever it might be, I thought that it would be better if we did it like an old-fashioned radio play kind of setup where everybody's in at the same time. Everybody's got their own microphone, because we've got 2 studios. We've got a little voiceover booth and a proper studio as well. And so if we sit everybody in the big studio, we can record it all down like a radio play and edit out any little mistakes or whatever that we need to. But it would mean that the actors then can really play off each other, and they have that line in front of them. So if they need to be angry, they've got the intro for them to be angry. They don't have to fabricate it in their brain. So I thought that would be a better way to record it. And in my opinion, I was right. I thought it came out really, really well. So it's called the Body Corporate Meeting. So I know in America they call them home owners associations, where you've got like big gated estates. I actually live in one. That's what gave me the inspiration for it, because where I live, there's 90 houses in like this little gated area. So, and they've got a body corporate. We call them body corporates. So, where it's a bunch of idiots who have no idea of how to run any kind of a business because they're old retirees who have nothing better to do with their day, but sit around and bitch and moan about things that really don't matter. So that's essentially was the inspiration for this particular audio piece. And so, it sort of was written pretty easily because the caretaker manager of my estate that I live in is a really nice guy. He's an English guy called Ralph. I think he's from Kent, I think, but he's a lovely man and he's got a great sense of humour and he has to attend the body corporate meetings because it's part of his job. So I said to him one day, because he was complaining about some of the silly things they say and do, and I said, can you email me like 10 bullet points of the dumbest things that you've heard at the body corporate meetings? And so he did. And so I turned that into a script. And so that essentially is the script. And people listen to it and they go, they don't believe that some of the things are for real. Like, for example, one of the things was they held an investigation into the duck poo that was around the pool and barbecue area. And the investigation came back that the cause of the problem might be ducks.
Christ.
So that's the kind of stupidity that we're dealing with, and that's why I decided it would work well in a comedy sketch situation. So because sometimes a good psychology friend of mine, she says sometimes the only reaction that is sensible to give is to laugh and mock at people when they're being idiots, because that's the normal reaction. You sometimes just have to laugh at people when they say and do dumb things because that's a normal reaction to do. And this is one of those situations. So, so I simply turned those 10 bullet points that Ralph gave me into a hilarious, hopefully hilarious, comedy sketch that goes for about half an hour. So, yeah, it's essentially, like you said, it's 6 people sitting around having a meeting, trying to resolve issues that probably don't actually need resolving.
Well, it sounds great. And it sounds very funny as well. As how was, like, when you were putting that together, you say, like, it sounds really good at the end product. Did the actors, did they also appreciate, because I imagine a couple of them have also done some of your audio productions and things as well. And so did they appreciate it? And also I assume it was a bit easier just on your own production wise, because like, well, everyone's here. Lining people up is so much easier because, you know, when you record everyone separately, you have to try and line people up and it can be a nightmare. So I imagine just from your end as well, it probably felt better because, as you said, people can bounce off each other. And also they probably appreciated it a lot more. And also it's probably just much easier to kind of do. And then with if there's ever a mistake, I assume because it was audio only, you could just kind of retrace back only a couple of minutes rather than say starting again, because you wouldn't start the whole thing again necessarily. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, pretty much. So for your first point, they all get paid, so they'll show up because they're getting paid. So there's no danger of nobody not showing up. Otherwise, they ain't getting paid. So we'll tick that one off as an easy fix. But you are correct in regards to editing. Obviously, you know, people make mistakes. That's what they do. Not intentionally, obviously, but there's also times where they might deliver the line. And what I'll do is I'll just say to them again, and they'll just do it again. And then, as you rightly say, audio is dead easy to edit. So all you have to do then is cut out their mistake, and bang, you've got a straight, smooth sentence. But also, what we did was I made sure it was a whole day thing. So we spent the entire morning rehearsing, and then we had lunch, and then we went into the studio and recorded it. So we rehearsed it maybe 4 or 5 times prior, so everybody knew precisely what was going to happen, how it was going to happen, how I wanted the lines delivered, all that sort of stuff. So it was all very well rehearsed so that when we did get into the studio, we weren't sitting in there for, you know, hours on end. So, so it was the recording of it. It was just one recording. So I said to him, we're only recording this one time. So we got into the studio at 1:30 and I said, I want everybody out of here by 2:30. So we've got the rest of the afternoon then to edit. So, and that's essentially what happened. So I met up with them at 9. We rehearsed for 3 hours. We had lunch. We went to the studio. We recorded, and then Scott and I did the editing. 2:30 to took a couple of hours, but So that's essentially how it went down. And because the one part that was really easy about it, because usually with the audio sketches, you usually have to put in sound effects and all that sort of stuff. But being a body corporate meeting, there were no need for anything like that because it's just a meeting where people are going back and forth.
Mm.
So it was pretty straightforward. But that's the other thing as well. Just being audio, I needed to make sure it was very snappy as well, because all you've got is their voices to tell the story and to keep the interest. So it's very, very sharp and very, very snappy. So hopefully people do give it a listen and have a good laugh.
No, I'm sure. And so that leads us on to, so we've got two films to talk about, The Harsh Reality of Reenactment Acting and Local Heroes. If I'm right, was Reenactment Acting was the one that was released first, and then it was Local Heroes. Is that right? Yeah,
that's correct. Yes, indeed.
So with the first one, so the way the first one starts is the little sketch sort of before the title, which is when you said you were called Charles. That completely threw me off. I was cracked up at that because literally at the start when it's saying, you're without spoiling the whole thing because it's just like a cold open kind of thing where you're like, yeah, I'm Charles, I'm Gough's body double, and I do like podcasts and stuff he doesn't want to do, and I do this and stuff. I thought that was so funny because that was such a meta joke, and also because people, if that was someone's first Beernuts film, they'd be like, what's happening? But anyone else who's seen any stuff, because I was like, the first thing I did as soon as I started, I wrote down, I was like, oh my God, Gough is not playing Gough? And then I was like, oh, you're a body double called Charles who's the same as Gough. And then when you make certain lewd jokes, you're like, oh no, that's the kind of thing Gough would say. I'd never say anything like that. I thought that was quite funny. So before we get into the reenactment acting, had you had that kind of silly idea for a while, or did someone say, because we often joke that you play like the same character in all of your things, and you say it's because you have limited acting range, so you're just like, I just play Gough, or a version of Gough in all of your stuff. So what was the Charles thing about? Because genuinely that really cracked me up.
Well, firstly, good. I'm pleased that cracked you up. And secondly, yes, the first part you said was correct. So I'd written that sketch years and years ago and was just desperate to put it in something. And it didn't really fit into anything. So finally, I just thought, fuck it, I'll just put it at the start of one of the films. It really is as simple as that. So yes.
Amazing. Also, sometimes the simple answers are the best ones, but I want to highlight that specifically because I loved that. So, I always ask you this kind of general standard question when we talk about your films, which is, what inspired this? So I've written, and this is to quote my own notes, what inspired reenactment acting? Not to be rude, but have you actually seen reenactment acting? Not to make a joke at your disability, but I myself have never seen a reenactment thing. I think in America they're a bit more common. But have you actually ever seen a reenactment thing? Do they do them in Australia very much? And then what inspired this out of interest?
Well, yes. So hatred inspired this because you are correct. I have seen my father, when I was younger, my old man was obsessed with aeroplane investigation shows and murder reenactment shows and all that sort of stuff. So yes, I was forced to watch them. Well, not forced to watch them. I mean, I did have the option to leave the room, but they were on the TV all the time. And I hated them so much because the acting is atrocious. The scripts are atrocious. Everything about them, the dialogue is unbelievable. The way it's delivered is unbelievable. Everything about them is terrible, absolutely appalling. And so I just dislike those shows so much. So with that hatred in my heart, I decided to write a film about it, to make fun of it and to mock it. So yes, it's essentially the harsh reality of reenactment acting is making fun out of all of those awful reenactment shows. So whether it be a true crime TV show or an airline investigation show or all those, I don't know, at school we had to sit through them as well with sex ed videos and don't do drugs videos and all that sort of awful. Again, it's people who have never. It's almost like virgins making sex ed. It's like they've got no idea what happens. And I remember at high school once having to watch a don't do drugs PSA thing, and it was like these people have no idea what they're talking about. They've got no idea what it feels like to be on drugs. They don't even read a book about drugs and decided, because usually they're Christians who are just, oh no, everything's horrible and bad, and they make just the worst shit ever. So yes, it was inspired by all those atrociously bad reenactment shows that people may have watched. They're not, I suppose. Podcasts have kind of taken over a little bit because people listen to true crime podcasts or airline investigation podcasts so much now, which is more interview type stuff. Whereas, back in the day, back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was all these, murder and especially those airline investigation ones. I keep going back to them because they were the worst. So, yeah.
So something that traumatized Gough is the airline investigation thing. It's like therapy talking about that and getting this out of your system. It's funny because with the reenactment stuff, like I remember that I think heralded by America when there was like the whole Say No to Drugs campaign, and because England owed so much money to America and the reparations whenever they changed their drug policy. We always have to follow them because of World War II and stuff. So it's like when Reagan got into power and then suddenly was like, drugs are the worst thing in the world. They're the thing killing everyone, And then so our government basically had to follow them. So I remember, especially in my youth, there was a lot of crappy drug adverts, which didn't make much sense. And a lot of the time were just lies. And then when you're a teenager and you're like, maybe I'll try this little weaker one. And then you go, oh, it turns out the government's been lying. And then that becomes a big whole nother thing. But I do remember I think with true crime stuff, I don't remember seeing much of that reenactment acting. And I fortunately managed to avoid quite a lot of the religious related, a lot of Christian stuff of trying to get you to not do most of the fun things. But I've seen the odd stuff, but I know in documentaries, I think in UK documentaries, maybe not so much anymore, but I know that they didn't do as much reenactment stuff. It was generally just like quite calm, quite interviews, like let's go the facts. And I think America, especially when they do a lot of documentaries, it's like, today on the most intense killers ever, we're going to show you how it happened. And you're like, well, okay. And it's almost gratuitous in that way. So it is funny hearing because I didn't even consider in Australia like how many of those weird little shows would pop up and stuff. And like, as you say, before I watched this film of yours, I was like, oh yeah, people get paid to do that. And there's people whose jobs it is to do this cheesy reenactment acting. So unintended, Gough, you made me think about stuff with your fun comedy and your sketches and stuff. I was like, actually, I haven't really thought about anyone whose job it is to actually do reenactment acting.
Well, that's the thing there. And again, I don't mean to be offensive, but they're usually failed actors because they can't get work anywhere else because they're terrible, and so that's why they end up doing these reenactment shows. I mean, it is what it is, I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but
I love that. Don't mean to be rude, but you're shit. Well, I will say, one of the things I really liked is this is in the trailer that you released of this, which is I've just written the ultra close tourists. And I just think the brilliance of when they're chatting with you and then they just walk really, really close to the camera and they ask their cameraman that thing, that I absolutely loved that bit. Like the tourist bit. I think with this film in particular, it feels maybe more sporadic. Not necessarily in a bad way, but there are certain... With your sketches, because of sketch comedy, you can be a bit wider with certain subject matter. But with this one, it felt like you've got some of the core things, and then other stuff like the tourism part and the cold open were a little bit seemingly... you didn't have to do reenactment acting. It was just kind of a sketch and idea that came from anywhere. So was that one that you also had kind of in your back pocket for a little while? Or was that one when you got to write in the script, you're like, actually, this will work? Or how did the tourism bit kind of fit into that?
Yeah, well, so you are correct. So if we take away the cold open and we just got focused on the actual film itself, I wrote the script and it wasn't very long. And I'm like, oh shit, this isn't going to be long enough to turn into a film. It needs, because I do like my movies to be 20 minutes plus, because otherwise I feel like people might feel like they're being ripped off. So, I want to give them a decent amount of content. So it wasn't long enough. And I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do? So I'm like, well, there's only one thing to do, and that is to put in more jokes in and around wherever it's going to suit. So that's essentially what I did. So I wrote the intro and then, continued going on with the film. And then when I went back for my read through, when I realized it wasn't long enough, I'm like, okay, well, we need to make the intro longer. So what shall we do? I know what we'll do. We'll add some silly tourists because that will be funny. And so there was a few times in that, there's an audio sketch within the film as well. And again, that was born about by the same thing. I mean, I was like, okay, well, I'm a bit short on time here. I need to add something. I know what would be funny if during this particular bit, because it will suit really nicely, if we just interrupt it with an audio sketch for no reason sort of a situation. So, yeah, so the actual script itself just wasn't quite long enough. So I just needed to add some more jokes in there and spread it out a little bit.
I mean, that's the great thing about sketch comedy is that you can attach things that aren't necessarily connected, but they can thematically work. And obviously where you are the character of Gough, where it's mockumentary style, you can kind of get away with anything without it feeling inorganic. But I did have a note here, which I literally wrote, what was the End of the World sketch all about? Was it written a while ago? Because I was like, it is funny, but it, as you say, it was like, it came out of nowhere. But you've kind of said, I think a lot of the time with comedies in general, I know that when you hear even people make like really big blockbustery comedy films, a lot of the time it's like, 80% of it I had planned, but you've got these gaps in. It was like, I was working on this other film and I had this joke about, farting into a sink or whatever. And then they're like, that didn't really fit into whatever it was I was doing. I thought about it and then I made the new film and I was like, that'll fit in there. So it's like the cutting room floor when it comes to sketch comedy is really great, because you could almost, I imagine, you've probably got lots of little sketches that you've probably cut out of other stuff, and you could almost make like a film that has no common theme, but has loads of random one-off sketches. But because your output's so high, you can fit them in.
Well, you spot. So I don't know. A few years ago, I'm 99% sure you saw the movie. Yes, I know you did. The movie book club that I did.
Yes.
Yeah. So that essentially is what you just said. It was a whole bunch of sketches that I had. And then I was like, okay, how am I going to tie all these sketches together? Oh, I know. If I have a bunch of women bitching and moaning in a book club situation, and then we can just cut to the sketches. So you are absolutely spot on. And when it comes to the audio sketch, that had been written a while ago, and I liked it, and I wanted to use it, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to use it, because it kind of fits, because it is I am taking the piss out of the media in that sketch. And I am also taking the piss out of the entertainment industry, generally speaking, with the whole reenactment acting. So it did fit into the theme, kind of, and it also helped in stretching out the bit, and it's also funny, and it also worked because where I inserted it was the perfect place for something to be inserted. So I thought it worked on a number of levels, which is why I did it. So, yes.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I've got a couple more questions about this one, and then we'll move on to local heroes. But I want to note that the gentleman in the pink suit, who was sort of the teacher of the reenactment school, I'm not sure if I've seen him before, but I wrote, he almost feels Shakespearean. Some of your actors all of your actors are great in different ways. Some of them are a lot more they feel like actors, and other ones feel like, comedy actors are willing to do silly stuff. And I've written down, he almost feels like Shakespearean, because he feels like so, not above, but I was like, this guy feels like he could almost match Sir Ian McKellen, people like that. I just got that gravitas kind of vibe to him. Have you worked with him before and I potentially missed it, or is this a new one for him? And I was interested by his acting, really.
No, first time I've worked with him. He auditioned for one of my films like 5-6 years ago, but he didn't get the role, not because he was no good in the audition, the role just didn't suit him, because he does have, as you say, a certain style about him. So he's just, and it's no offense to David, he's a very fine actor. It's just, if you wanted someone to play a bikey gangster, it ain't going to be him. You know what I mean? It's just not going to suit him. It's just that's no offense to him. It's just not fit. That particular character is not for him. Now, when it came to this character, he came in for the audition and he just blew it off straight away, because it absolutely, I needed what he gave was just perfection. It was exactly what that character required, was big and over the top, and he does that extremely well. And so I hadn't worked with him before. I did sort of kind of know him, but so it was the first time I worked with him. He did an outstanding job. He was really great to work with. I enjoyed working with him very much. So no doubt you'll see him again pop up in something at some time in the future, because I always like those who do a good job for me. I mean, it's silly not to hire them again. So he's on the list. So I definitely will get him in again. But yes, you are correct. He does have a certain style about him, so there's only a certain amount of roles that he's going to be able to do, which is totally fine. But what he does do is fantastic. It's one of those things like there's certain actors and they do one thing really, 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 really well, and he's one of those guys.
Completely, because it's like whenever I see like Kale pop up, which again, it was great seeing him in Local Heroes as the Gravedigger. Like whenever I see him, I'm like, well, Kale can do relatively anything, because he can just be silly and he can be this or that. But I felt like, the gentleman that you referred to, sorry, what was his name? The one in the pink suit?
David is his name.
So David was smashing, but also I think with comedy, you have to kind of have that mix of, sometimes you've got the kind of characters where it's like they're clearly knowing they're in a comedy sketch and that's what's funny. But a lot of the time as well, you've got to have characters who don't realise almost that they're in the joke. And a lot of the time they're the funnier character, the straight man in a sense. And so with David being that, and he was obviously very over the top, but it was still quite realistic to people we have met sometimes are just quite over the top in that respect. So it was very entertaining of him playing it straight while obviously being ridiculous. And I think that was one of my favourite parts of that film in particular, was just him absolutely nailing it. And then some of the other jokes that came with it, like, I won't spoil the jokes, but like, I'll say one little line which is responsible for 90% of the world's crime. I was like, that killed me. I was just like, it was just one little odd fly though. I imagine some people watching the film may not have even necessarily picked up on that joke, but that really got me. I love that one.
well, again, good. But yes, the other thing with reenactment actors, when I was writing it, because I do a lot of I do other things too, but I do a lot of mockumentaries, and I thought it would be nice because I don't want people to ever get bored with what I do. So I thought it would be nice if I gave this one a little bit of a twist and a little bit of a turn and made it a little bit more narrative sort of thing. It's a mockumentary, but it had a little bit of a narrative in it as well, with a little bit of a twist and a turn, because just to make it a little bit different, I thought that would be a good thing to do.
No, definitely. And the last thing I want to speak about with this film, because obviously you and I could just go through the entire film, but obviously this wants to be, I want to promote the film and try and get people to go watch it and consider it, not just say, here's all the best bits, now you don't have to watch it. That's not the intention. But there was one other line, which is going to link in with Local Heroes, actually, which is, I really liked in the reenactment acting where you get the sort of cokehead kind of the actor guy who's essentially and the prostitute comes and meets him. But it really tickled me when there's points where someone's talking about something and then it keeps cutting to him and he's like, why do you keep cutting to me? Like, what? Like that. And the reason I mentioned that connecting a little bit with Local Heroes is because in one of the scenes you're talking off camera almost because you're in a mockumentary, you're referring to that, and the person who's with you is like, who are you talking to? And I thought these two films, I know occasionally you do meta stuff, especially when you're Gough the mockumentary maker and you're saying, I'm making a film, that kind of thing. But I feel like the stop cutting to me bit, and then the part in Local Heroes, which is, who are you talking to? Both of those were like really good meta jokes that I really appreciated. So I just wondered, did you consciously with these two films try and put in meta jokes, or you're like, this just fits? Why not? There are no rules with the Beernuts world.
Well, that is true. There are no rules with the Beernuts world. But so Michael, who played the talent agent, the man of which you refer, this is actually because are you a Guns N' Roses fan by any chance?
I mean, I know they're big hits. I probably wouldn't call myself a fan.
Fair enough. Well, so I watched when I was a young fella. They were my favourite band. Absolutely loved Guns N' Roses as a young, and I mean like. This has actually got nothing to do with nothing, but this is just humorous. As a 10-year-old, so I'm 10, so a little 10-year-old me, we all had to do an assignment at school about our favourite singer or band and do a little report on them. And so everybody's choosing like the Beatles and Bruce, like who their parents like, essentially. And I've chosen Guns N' Roses. So you've got a little 10-year-old boy coming in going, I like Guns N' Roses. And I've held up a picture of Axl Rose with his Charles Manson T-shirt and all this. So anyway, so my point is I watched a documentary on Guns N' Roses, and apparently when they released Appetite for Destruction, none of the radio stations would play any of the tracks. And so about a week or two later, the head of the record company sent out sex workers with a gram of cocaine to all the program directors at all the radio stations around the country, and within a week, it was the most aired album on US radio. So I'm just secondhand telling that story. I don't know if it's true. It sounds true because it was the late 80s, so I'm going to go with it was. But and I love that story so much, and that story inspired the joke with the sex worker in the film, because I particularly like that joke with the sex worker in the film, and yes, you brought it up, so hence why I'm mentioning it. But to answer the second part of your question, in regards to the reenactment actors, I just thought it would be funny to do the jump cuts. I just thought it would be a funny thing to do. Again, there's no rhyme or reason to it. I just thought it would be humorous. So and it had absolutely nothing to do with Local Heroes. They were written a long time apart from each other. So it's just a coincidence more than anything else that there's a couple of sort of meta jokes in both is more of just a coincidence than anything else. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's also with linking with the Guns N' Roses thing is that I really like the band Motley Crue, and so I read I read Nicky Sixx, the bassist and songwriter. I read his autobiography and then the follow up, and then I also read Motley Crue's full autobiography, The Dirt, which they made into a Netflix film. That's pretty good. And then when I was really into autobiographies at the time, going back a few years, I also read part of Slash's autobiography. And from what I understand of what was going on behind the scenes for Slash, and because Motley Crue as well, very close-knit with Guns N' Roses, a lot of their first really big tours were Guns N' Roses supporting Motley Crue. And then obviously Guns N' Roses exploded, especially with Appetite for Destruction and Welcome to the Jungle, the songs on Appetite for Destruction, etc. And so it's quite interesting because I think that if it was any other band with that anecdote about potentially sending sex workers and cocaine to record labels, I'd be like, maybe not. But actually, from everything I've read about Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, and the kind of stuff they used to get up to and be like, literally, oh yeah, I'm going to this hotel, I'm only going to play this show if you get me loads of heroin. And they're like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And you're like, what is this? And the answer is, oh, it's the 80s. That's what the answer to any of the questions are. So I'm like, I'm not going to look it up. Anyone who wants to fact check, you guys can go ahead, let us know in the comments or something if that's not true. But I think I want to believe it's true just because of the craziness of that era and that industry. I'm like, you know what? Do it.
You're absolutely right. There's some stories that you don't want to know are false. They're like, I just love that story and I'm going to run with it because I love it. And that's one of those ones for me, is that Guns N' Roses where the record label sends out sex workers and cocaine to all the radio stations, and within a week it's the most played album on American radio. I love it. So it's so great.
Good. It is. It's amazing. And there's a show in the UK called Nevermind the Buzzcocks. It was in
of course, yes.
Yeah, and it had, I think, Simon Amstell used to host it, and then they brought it back with Greg Davies, who is the host of Taskmaster now. And so Megan and I occasionally watch it, especially when there's guests on that we know and like. And they, have for anyone who's not heard of Nevermind the Buzzcocks, they have segments in there which are like crazy stories that have happened, and essentially the teams have to guess. There's 3 that go on screen, 2 of them are made up, 1 of them's real, and they're always completely insane. And you hear about them and you're like, none of these can be true. But it's like, no, the whole game is you have to figure out which one of these is true. And so the more you watch that show, the more you hear about some of the crazy stuff people get up to. You're like, you know what? That actually, the Guns N' Roses story isn't actually as crazy as some of the other stuff. I mean, in the Motley Crue autobiography, Ozzy Osbourne, and I think they put this in The Dirt, the movie of it, in it, he literally snorts a line of ants. So there's ants, yes. Animals. And he literally does it. I read it in the autobiography and then they put it in the film, and it's like, oh yeah, Ozzy Osbourne in the autobiography, in the book, he does even more crazy stuff than that in that scene. So when you find out when people are on God knows what, and, millions and millions of dollars are being thrown around, people do crazy stuff. So speaking of crazy stuff, Local Heroes, the other film we're talking about. So the first thing about this one is you start the movie by saying you get loads of feedback about how negative you are about the whole world and about how you put things in a bad light. Now, I assume you probably don't get that, but I want to ask, do you actually get anyone who contacts you and says that your content is too negative or takes the piss out of people in the right way? Was that actually inspired by anything, or you just using it as a plot device? It was.
No. I absolutely get that.
Do you? Tell us.
I get that, not so much from the general public, but from people within the entertainment industry. So acting agents and other production crew and actors and things. I get that a lot, that they don't like me because I'm hanging shit on people and they think I'm they don't appreciate my style, shall we say. So that was I'm a child, and I'm very what's the right word? Well, I'm a child, so I think I think my rebuttal is suitably appropriate.
That's so funny, because I don't know how many, because when you have either a show or a product or things like that, I often find that engagement isn't always correlating with views. I know people who have loads more views on their podcast than I do, but no one really makes contact with them. Whereas there's other shows like mine that are a bit smaller, but often I do get, comments of people. Most episodes I release, I get a fan or two or an audience member contact me to say this was great or this, what follow-up questions and stuff. And so it's quite interesting, because I was like, where you're primarily making short films, I didn't know, if fans and audience actually speak to you like that. But yeah, negative feedback, because I know in the past you've spoken about where you've had acting agencies and you've been like, I need this, this, and this, and then they send you someone and you're like, what? I asked for these 3 things. They're like, oh, I didn't think you really needed that, or oh yeah, I didn't think it was as bad as that, or I didn't think you were actually going in. And you're like, what are you talking about? I told you in black and white, this is what I need. Send someone who's not going to be offended by satirical humor. And so it's so funny hearing that you get that it was actually, was that the impetus? Is that why you created this? Or was this more, you had this script planned anyway and the negative feedback thing kind of worked as an intro?
No. You were right the first time. So yeah, it was the impetus. So I kind of got sick and tired of everybody saying, well, not everybody, that's the wrong, like I say, the general public laugh and dig my stuff. It's people within the entertainment industry that seem to take umbrage to my jokes and what I do because they find it, because like I said at the beginning of the interview, what I do is unusual because I do it differently. And I think it's more a case of they don't understand more than so they take offense simply because they're ignorant and they don't understand. Instead of asking questions and learning, they decide to just pigeonhole and all that sort of stuff. So yes, it was 100% inspired by the fact that I got a little bit sick and tired one day of having people going, you're very inappropriate, I don't approve of this at all. No, that's wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. It's no, I don't like that at all. So I got to, and so I sat down one day, and again, it's almost therapeutic. I just put it all on the page, and this is kind of my fuck you, I suppose, to all of those people. And the best part is absolutely none of them will see it because they don't like me, so it'll just be my own joke to myself.
Which I know that you've even in this conversation mentioned it, but you get inspired by people, especially when they're just dicks to you. There's been points, I can't remember which film it was, but I remember you saying you had an actor who was quite difficult and kept questioning everything you were doing, and then you basically turned part of that element into sort of like one of the sketches, which was like having an actor who was constantly questioning you on doing stuff. So I think it's funny. It's like when you critique someone, especially when they're in comedy, the chances are you're going to in some form be put on page. So it's actually, it's like a problem, isn't it? It's like, if you're going to mock anyone and if you're going to criticize someone, if it's going to be someone in comedy, be prepared they're probably going to, it's like stand-up comedy. You know, the joke is don't date someone who's doing stand-up comedy because any of your dirty laundry, they're going to turn into a joke on stage. So it's just, it cracks me up hearing some of the stuff you get because I'm like, how do they not know? Your production company is called Beernuts Productions. You know, it's not Serious Megarius documentaries. It's very clearly meant to be satirical and joking, so it boggles the mind some of the people you must interact with. It never. I mean, I should be surprised. I'm constantly surprised, but I shouldn't be surprised. You are correct. Like it's been happening for so long. I mean, the world's full of idiots, and so I just like to make fun of them with different ways and things. So, and you are right. Like I do get inspired by morons. There's a woman on Australian television who just, and like I said earlier, it's therapeutic. So there's a woman on Australian television who shall remain nameless, and she just irritates me. Now, I've never met her. She might be lovely. She might feed the homeless and donate blood and do wonderful things. I don't know. I've never met her. But I don't like her on the television because I find her to be irritating and unprofessional and awful at her job. So when it came to a film I did a long time ago called The War on Drugs, that came about because I typed out a whole conversation just taking the piss out of her, and then that film sort of evolved from that one big long sketch that I had written. So yeah, that seems to happen a lot where people, and there's a couple of the actors who have worked with me a lot, Cale being one of them, he's aware of this, and so he always is like, well, I'll try and make sure I don't say anything stupid because we don't want you taking the piss out of me in one of your films. So there's a few of the actors who have worked with me a lot. They're aware of this, and so they and one or two of them even try and guess. Are you making fun of so and so? Is this about this person? So, and I'll never tell them because it would be rude and unprofessional for me to do that. So I always keep it to myself. If it's somebody, even if it's somebody famous or someone that they might know who's not so famous, then I always keep it to myself. But I will answer them and say, yes, it is about a specific human being, but you'll never find out who. I'm keeping it to myself. But yeah, so a lot of the film scripts I write
are bred out of hatred, let's say.
The polar opposite of laughter, hatred, and that's a beautiful merging of those two things. So I want to ask you a little bit. So we've got there's quite a lot of sort of meta parts of this local heroes thing, which I really like. I'm a big fan of meta humor. But I want to talk about the gravedigger part a little bit because, again, I really like your style of comedy, but a lot of the time I find the sketches are great, but sometimes what makes me laugh the most is just one almost innocuous line or one little bit in it that tickles me. I don't know if it's the British humour or what, but I think in the Gravedigger sketch, I think one of the things that I like the most was when you're saying, is this even a real job? Is this even a thing anymore? Like, and I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I know from, I think, films and media, there's certain things that people think about. It's like, quicksand is going to be dangerous. It's like, it's not. And it's like, gravediggers is a real job because we've all seen films about zombies or Frankenstein or something. And it's like, I don't think gravediggers have been a thing since like the 17 or 1800s maybe, when I think scientists maybe hired people to get to gravedigg so they could maybe do experiments and tests on them. But that whole gravedigger thing, what made you think of that? And is it actually a job in Australia? Like, did you look into that, or was it just who knows?
well, there's 8 local heroes that I interview, and some of them have jobs that are completely false and do not exist. And the shallow grave salesman is one of them, because I don't believe that anybody sells their services of digging shallow graves for people to dump corpses. I don't think that's
to that degree. I meant it was more, but it's still like normal even grave diggers. I don't even know if that's a real thing.
That's where that was going. That's what Kale Campers was. That's what he was selling. So So I did make up a bunch of. Some of them have real jobs. Like there's a woman who's an electrician. There's a woman who's a gold digger, which isn't really a job, but it's a thing. But then of course there's other people who don't have real jobs, like the revenge sexologist, for example. That's not a real thing. And shallow grave salesman, as Kale Campers, played very well, I might add. I thought that was one of his best things he's ever done. That is an absolutely false job, and that just came about one night. I may have, don't quote me on this, but there may have been some herbal refreshment, and I thought that a shallow grave digger and a conversation with someone purchasing a shallow grave would be funny. So I wrote it. So essentially that's all I can tell you.
Amazing. It is one of those things. I mean, inspiration comes out of, a variety of different places, and it's like the unexpected is often the kind of thing that works with comedy. And I think that's what works with this. Because, obviously I know there's no shallow grave digger as a job itself, but even the idea of an actual grave digger, I'm like, I assume someone must. I assume when they have cemeteries and stuff, I would presume they use machinery now. But again, I've never seen anyone dig a grave or anything. So even in that little joke, I was like, actually, I don't even know if you don't really see people wearing, caps and stuff standing around cemeteries with giant shovels just waiting. That's not really a very common thing. So even that I found very entertaining. And I really like it when your comedy, when you have those, when people are acting really normal about something that's completely batshit. That's some of the best. And that interaction with Kale and the actress when they're talking, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about killing my husband because he's just a pain. And okay, that's fine. Yes, I can dig a grave for you. That's not a problem. And just really normal stuff about really dark things. And that's one of the areas of your comedy which I really, really like. So I very much appreciated that.
Well, yeah, if you don't deliver it straight, it just would not be. If you had that script and you were really hammy or something like that, it just simply would not be funny. If you don't deliver it super straight, then it's just simply not funny. So, there's certain things where you just have no choice. If you want it to land, it has to be delivered. And I tell a lot of the actors, because you are correct, a lot of my stuff is like that. And so I tell the actors, you have to deliver this like you're a dramatic actor or it's just not going to work. And you have to say these the way I usually word it to them is you have to say these outrageous things like they're totally normal. Like, I'm going down to the shops to get some bread and some milk. It's all very normal. I'm going down to the park to purchase myself a shallow grave because that's what I want to do today. It's all very normal and all very, that's what we all do on a Tuesday afternoon. So I absolutely, because sometimes the actors will come into an audition and they're genuinely confused by the script because it's outrageous. And that's when I have to say to them, no, you got to deliver it really straight. So if you listen to it and you play it straight, you'll find that it'll work and it'll be really funny. So, you're quite right.
And I want to ask as well, one thing I like is delving deeper into the lore of Beernuts, because I obviously consume quite a lot of the Beernuts content and things. And obviously speaking with you, understanding some of the inner workings behind the scenes, I like to, or occasionally when we speak, I like to have put a little theory behind Gough, because your character of Gough within Beernuts is the one sort of consistent throughout it. Or obviously there are certain actors that come back and etc. But you're like the one thing that's consistent throughout it. And I think it's almost... You're the straight man in the whole thing, even though you're the secret orchestrator. And so I've got another theory, which is about, is Gough essentially cursed, so that when the character of Gough is cursed, because whenever he talks to anyone, the worst of people always comes out and they seem to just spill their secrets. And it was almost like, I'm saying it in jest because I imagine you don't think of it specifically like this, but in my own head, I'm like, all these films all happen in the same universe. They all exist. And what happens is these people who seemingly are normal, which Gough finds, and he's like, you're a normal person, you're a teacher or something. And then as soon as he starts talking to them, they just come out with insane stuff. So for me, I'm just like, Gough has been cursed in the Beernuts world, where anyone he talks to, they immediately spill their deepest, darkest secrets and act like it's really nonchalant. And I just like to think of that as, you're in this world where you're like, why is no one normal? Because every time I try to talk to normal local heroes, it comes out that everyone is doing really dodgy shit. And so I just quite liked that element. And I just think that's my own headcanon. That is, Gough has got this magic power that he doesn't even know about, a curse of that.
Well. Firstly, I would just like to say that the Beernuts universe is far more entertaining than the Marvel universe. So I just want to put that on the record.
Beernuts cinematic universe.
Yes. Where you are quite right. Everybody seems normal on the outside, but is batshit crazy on the inside. They're psychopaths and sex offenders and all sorts of people. But yes, actually, it's funny you should mention such things, because our friend Cale Campers, who we've discussed a little bit, he has a very similar. You've never spoken to Cale, but he comes out with the exact same thing as what you do. So he's like, one day it would be fun if we just sort of played all your films back to back, and it's like your life, and it's just like, this is just how your life has proceeded. So yes, you're not the only one to come to that conclusion.
Ooh, maybe that's an idea for a film in the future. Is almost like it would be very, very meta, and the audience would only really be able to be other Beernuts people, but it would almost be like you could do it where you could almost recreate certain scenes from other films, but almost from like the different perspective, like a Rashomon kind of thing, where you go like, oh yeah, he does this comedy sketch and then Gough walks off, and then actually we get a little extra from Gough in this film and that film and that film, and it all comes together. Maybe Gough is figuring out this weird conspiracy thing, and then it turns out he's just being nuts. Anything like that. I'm just all up for any meta, any connective stuff, because I love it when I see certain common threads in Beernuts. But there's two more things I wanted to mention in Local Heroes, which is one thing I thought was really good was the housewife monologue. I think it's more towards the end. Like, that was delivered really well. And again, it's one of those times where I think it's all in one take. And and so I just want to say that was really impressive. I found that, like, again, anyone who managed to do a monologue is really impressive. And obviously when you do it, it's good, but you have written it, so it's, I think, easier to retain. So I just want to point out that I think that was a really, really good show of acting there by that actress.
Yeah, no, Leah smashed it. So I rehearsed with her a lot, because again, it's a 2.5 page monologue. So on screen it went for, I think, just over 4 minutes. And you are correct, it was one take. And I said to her, again, you have to deliver this super normal and super casual, or it just won't be funny, because the stuff she says is beyond horrendous. And I said, that's why it'll be funny, you folding laundry and acting super chill while you say these horrible, awful things. And she was down for it. She says to me, when I gave her because I'd worked with Leah a couple of times, and she's very, very good. I love working with her. She's a wonderful actress and a really nice person. And so I said to her, when I gave her the role, I'm like, you'll be doing it all in one go, so just be aware of that. There will be no cuts, so you do need to have it absolutely spot on. We'll rehearse a lot, but you need to understand that the more normal you sound, the funnier it's going to be. And I said to her, like, little tips, like when you're at home rehearsing it, actually fold laundry, because when you're acting with your mouth, it's hard to then also work your hands. So you need to be used to working your brain and your hands at the same time, because you can get yourself in a bit of a mess. So I worked with her a lot, but she was great. The whole she absolutely crushed it. Like, I mean, yeah, she nailed it, and yeah, that's all there is to be said. She absolutely nailed it. It was we only ended up the first take we did. uh, there was some builders across the street who decided to do some drilling halfway through it, so that we couldn't use that one. And the second take, she didn't make any mistakes, but there was just a few tiny little things I wanted to correct. And the third take, she nailed it. So, I mean, that's
Wow.
impressive in itself that we didn't have to do it 28 times. Like by the third take, and she's like, "Do you want me to do it again?" I said, "There's no need. You crushed it. It was brilliant." So, yeah, it was cool. So I like working with Leah. She also said to me, this is funny. She says to me, because she's like, the last lot of auditions I've been doing, she's like, have all been for sweet, boring housewife mothers. She said, so I am absolutely loving this monologue because it is the complete opposite of a sweet, boring, nothing housewife mother. So she's like, I am absolutely loving this part. So she really dug it too, which obviously means, well, anything in life, if you enjoy doing it, you're going to do it well. So yeah, she was great.
That's what I think whenever I see Kale. I'm like, I know Kale's absolutely loving it. So not that any other people don't love it as well, but because I specifically recognize Kale, I'm like, whenever he's on screen, I know he's going to smash it because he's super into it. And I will say with the monologue as well, which I liked about her performance, was when she was folding the laundry, she was doing it in a clever way because she was just casually folding. And then on the odd occasion, and I assume it was partly with your direction as well, was there were certain points where she kind of in the monologue was looking like she was thinking about the next thing, and in that she would sometimes like pause the laundry folding just for a second, like holding a towel in her hand, and then when she continued, she put it down. I was like, those little subtle things again bring it to more realistic sort of ways. So again, I really, really liked that scene. That did stand out for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. She crushed it. So I can't speak more highly because it's a very difficult, like even for a very highly accomplished Hollywood actor to do something like that would be a challenge. And yeah, so hats off to Leah. She was fantastic.
100%. And then the last sort of thing about our local heroes, and then I've got one little question about idiom, and then we'll start to sort of wrap up. But I think with these two films, what I've quite enjoyed, I don't know if it's been a conscious thing or something I've noticed, but I feel like you've leaned somewhat more into using editing as a comedic device. Now, I know you've used it in the past for other things as well. This isn't the first time, but specifically, I mentioned some of the ones I quite liked, Stop Cutting to Me and things like that in Harsh Reality of Re-enactment. But in this one, I really liked one of my favorite jokes. Again, it's silly, it's simple, but it was when one of the characters, she says, I enjoy the very definition of life. And then it cuts, and then it comes up, and then you've got that great narration, which is the definition of life is blah, blah, and then it cuts back. And it's like, again, that subtlety and using editing to make it snappy and things. Not that your older films don't have that and your older films don't have humor to them and things, but I think as you progress, as everyone's always learning, and obviously you've got more people behind you, and obviously there's equipment that's been improved, which does help. But I think I've noticed that the editing side of things in recent films has been utilized a bit more as a comedy tool as well. I didn't know if that was something conscious or if it's just been a natural progression for you.
No, that's more just luck more than anything else. The harsh reality of reenactment actors, that was written a long time ago. Like I'm talking 15, 20 years ago, I wrote that script.
Wow.
So
Jeez.
it's because, like I said earlier, I was annoyed by those things. So I went to my room and I wrote it all down. So it's not a conscious effort to do it recently now. It's more just that was the script I wanted to do. And so it included that. And so that's what happened. But generally speaking, I don't like edits because I feel that it takes you out of the moment. I like to have nice wide shots because I like the audience to decide what they want to look at, because somebody's reaction to somebody saying something outrageous can be just as funny as the outrageous thing that the person is saying. So I'm not the boss of you, Mike. Mike's the boss of Mike. And if Mike wants to look at the person giving a reaction, then he can. Or if he wants to look at the person saying the line, then he can. I think it's up to the viewer to decide what they want to view and how they want to view it. So I do like to have wider shots more than close-ups, and I don't like edits for the same reason. I think it takes you out of the moment, and so I think that it's better to just let it, that's why we could have easily edited Leah's massive monologue and had close-ups of her hands folding washing or close-ups of her face doing the lines, but I didn't want none of that. I wanted the whole thing all in one go and all straight up. And then the audience, like you did, you were paying attention to her folding the washing because you found that humorous, whereas other people would not have noticed that because they're too busy focused on her facial expression. So, I'm big on that. So, no, to answer the initial question, it's more accidental that editing had been a part of the two films. But it is a tool that you can use in comedy, and I am a tool, and so I enjoy using tools. So, but yeah, no, it's more just coincidence. But I like I said earlier, I like to make sure that my films do have points of difference in them, so that people never get bored and go, "Oh, I've seen this before." It's like, I mean, I do have my own style, and I've had people who know me have said to me, like, Gough, when we watch a Beernuts film, we know within the first 5 or 10 seconds that you have written that script. We can hear your voice in that script. So, like, I do have my own style, but in saying that, I do like to keep things different so that the audience doesn't get bored. So, some films might be heavily edited, some films will have very few. It's just how each script is written, how it goes. So, yeah.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because I was like, there's certain, with the comedy sort of edit things here, I was like, oh, I hadn't necessarily noticed that overtly in the past. And I know that you often do like having, because a lot of your sketches feel quite, in a good way, feel quite theatrical in a sense, because a lot of the time it's a one shot and you've got people really bouncing off each other and there's no clear cuts, which really a lot of the time adds to the comedy. And especially it shows really what the actors can do, because, you know, when you've got like a 5-minute scene without a cut, that's really difficult to remember, hit all your cues and all that sort of stuff. And so when there was these sort of cuts, I was like, oh, this does feel different. So to that kind of point, it's like, and I think one of the reasons the definition of life joke works so much was because I was not expecting that at all, because of all the Beernuts productions I've seen, obviously editing has been used as with jokes, because certain jokes can only work with edits. But with that one, I think, again, that surprised me because it's so unexpected, because that's not the kind of comedy you always do. So I really, really liked that and found that refreshing. So I want to ask about idiom, but is there anything you want to touch upon with either Re-enactment or Local Heroes that we haven't before we get onto the final bits?
Well, it's just that people can download them and laugh hysterically like you did at the Beernuts Productions website.
I think I'm trying to decide which of the two, obviously people should pick up both. I'm trying to decide which of the two I prefer. I think they're both really equally good, I think, but I would say maybe the reenactment acting might have just about be my preference of the two. I think if only for David's brilliant Shakespearean acting and some of the really clever lines that come out of his character and almost his arc in a way. And I don't want to spoil what happens, but like with him, what happens to him and the callbacks to him. So I think just because of his performance, it's just a hairline above Local Heroes, but I think they are both absolutely excellent. So I want to ask you about Idiom then, as we start to wrap up. So Idiom is a film that you made. So it's a dark comedy, so it doesn't fit in with the mockumentary style. And you know, we spoke, I think, either earlier or off air, and it kind of links more with the kidnapping film that we've discussed in the past. So I just want to ask a little bit about Idiom. So what inspired you to create Idiom, and why have you done another film that's different to a mockumentary? Now I know obviously other products, you've made books and you've made and audio dramas and things like that, but with the films you generally stick to mockumentaries more. So what was it about Idiom that made you want to do something a bit different?
Well, that's a very fine question. What was it that made me? Well, again, it was a script that I had. The reason I wrote it, well, it came, so there's a really big, long scene in it where my particular character finds a corpse on his front lawn, which is the poster of the film.
And in the trailer, I think, as well, which what I saw.
And yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's part of the scene. Yes, quite right. So, yeah, so I'd written that scene, and then I was like, okay, I really like that. It's a very long scene. I'm like, well, I need to put a story with it, because it's really, I really liked the scene. It was a funny scene. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to put a story with it now. And so I did. So that's really as simple as, there wasn't anything that particularly inspired this. It was just, I thought it would be funny. My initial thought was, I thought it would be funny if a bloke leaves his house and there's a corpse on his lawn, and he's got to try and he calls up his ex-girlfriend to try and help him figure out who it is and why it is and where it is and all that sort of stuff. So I thought that would be a funny thing. So I wrote that, and it turned into this big long scene. And I'm like, well, I want to put something around that now, because I really like that. And so I did. So I put a story to go with it, even though, like, I mean, that is kind of a story, but I put an actual story to go with it. So that's kind of what inspired it. And when you, if you know what the definition of idiom kind of describes what the film is actually all about. So where things may not appear what they seem is kind of the whole part of that. So again, I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I had this big scene. I thought, well, I'll do something more narrative. And why don't we make it where, things aren't really what they seem, and there's a few little twists and turns. I think that would be a good thing to do. So essentially, that's what I did.
Well, I'm very excited because I'm definitely want to tune into that one because that sounds very intriguing. So I think that'll be a tease that I said off air, like next year when we speak next January. Obviously, I'd love to have another one of the mockumentaries, but I think my choice of discussion is because I get to consume certain Beernuts content without having to pay for it, which is very lovely because I'm a special case. So I would really like being able to see Idiom and then maybe another mockumentary next year or whatever other products that piece of content you want to talk about next year. But Idiom, definitely, when I was doing a bit of research, I was like, that sounds really cool, really interesting. So you've hooked me. So I'll definitely be wanting to tune into that. And I really like it whenever you do things that are outside of, say, your comfort zone, because although you do mockumentaries really well and there's so many great things there, I do like seeing it because obviously we've been, I think you and I have been, I've been podcasting for, I think, 7 years or so, and I think you and I have been chatting for around 5 or 6. It's been a long time, so I've been able to see a lot of Beernuts stuff over the last several years. So I love it when I get to see you do things, not only when you get to mockumentaries because you've really got that down to a fine art, but also when you do things a little bit different. It's always really intriguing to me. So very, very excited to see that at some point.
Well, that's good, and hopefully your listeners are the same, and they'll because, like I say, last year we did the 3 films and the audio download. So we were quite busy last year, and it was a good year because they all came out really, really well, and they all people enjoyed them, which is even better. So I was very, very pleased with how all the 3 films and the audio piece, the body corporate meeting, how they all came out was super. So I was very, very happy with last year's turnout, I suppose would be the word, I guess.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll start to wrap up because I'm chatting for a nice chunky hour, a bit over. So what is Beernuts? What can you tell us about Beernuts in 2025? I'm sure you've got lots of things planned because you've got lots of scripts already written and all that kind of stuff. So what can you tell us about this year?
Well, yes, I do have a few projects up my sleeve that I want to get done this year. Always in January, I go through my scripts and my bank account and try and figure out what I can do. So I've got a fair idea of what I would like to do, but I never like to say too much because I don't want to jinx it because, you go out and you say, I'm going to do this, and then something goes pear-shaped, which you weren't expecting, and it all falls into a pile of shit, and then you look silly. So and I only like looking silly when I'm the boss of me looking silly. So I'll keep it under my hat with what I'm planning this year. But rest assured, if people stay tuned to the Beernuts Productions social media, the Facebook, the Twitter, which I think is now X, and then you've got your Instagram and your, what else is there? Your YouTube. Oh yeah, of course, YouTube and Threads. I'm on Threads. I don't know why nobody else is, but I am. And so if you hook up with Beernuts Productions on the socials, you'll get updates as to what's going on and what's being released and all of that sort of stuff through the year. So, and of course, just the Beernuts Productions website also has all that information on it as well. So, yeah.
Follow Gough on all the places. My favourite, I think for me personally, I really like YouTube because I stay subscribed and every now and then something will just pop up because, obviously, people should keep up with what you're doing, but what I like to do, because I know we'll chat every January, so I'm like, I don't have to specifically keep up to date, because when it gets nearer the end of the year, that's when I start to do a bit of research and stuff for a lot of your stuff. And so I quite like YouTube, because occasionally when I'm just not expecting it, it'll be like, oh, there's a new trailer out for something, or oh, there's a behind-the-scenes video, or behind-the-scenes doco, or things like that. So whenever that happens, I'm like, oh, really, really cool. I like seeing when those things pop up. So I would say, although obviously follow Beernuts on all the social media places, I'll put stuff in the description. YouTube for me is my favourite, because they're the ones where I get the little surprises. So I always love seeing more stuff come out from Beernuts. So last things then, Gough, obviously plug away your usual stuff, as we always like to do at the end of these conversations. Tell everyone in one last go, if they haven't already got the gist of everything we've been talking about. The floor is yours, sir, for the final plug.
Well, that's right. Beernutsproductions.com is the home of the world's greatest entertainment. And I'm confident with saying that, because as we discussed earlier, the Beernuts universe is far more entertaining than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yes, Beernutsproductions.com. Hit it up. We've got all the films there. So we're up to 31 movies. We've got the 17 audio downloads, a couple of books, and, of course, the podcast as well. So there's heaps and heaps of content that should keep you suitably entertained for the foreseeable future until the next film comes out. So, yes, absolutely.
Absolutely perfect. Well, amazing. Well, thanks again, Gough, as always, for being on the show. It's always delightful having our yearly catch up. It's always so much fun. I always look forward to it. It's a great way to kick off the year, and this will be coming out in sort of mid-January as well. So always like to, whenever I record with you, try and get out as soon as possible, so everything that you say is up to date and people can check out more Beernut stuff to kick off the new year. It's always a great time. It always puts you in a good stead, because regardless of what kind of terrible year you may or may not have had, Beernuts is a really great escape. So I love the world of Beernuts. So yeah, well, friends, thank you as always for tuning in. Make sure you follow Gough on all the social media places. All the details will be in the description. Subscribe to his YouTube channel as well, all that kind of great jazz, and listen to the podcast, because that's also really good insight. Especially one of my favorites is when you speak to Kale. I know it's a slightly older episode, but that's one of my absolute highlights, because you and Kale know each other so well, he does give you a bit of shit, which I really like in a respectful way. And I like it with you guys have got that great banter. So that's, if anyone wants to start with an episode that's not the one with me, I would say that's a really, really great one to tune into. So just as always, Gough, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much, my January friend. That will be your nickname from this moment forth.
Amazing stuff.